Hello, fellow innovators. This is Patrick Emmons.
And this is Shelli Nelson.
Welcome to the Innovation and the Digital Enterprise Podcast, where we interview successful visionaries and leaders, giving you an insight into how they drive and support innovation within their organizations. Today, we're welcoming Scott Kitun to the show. Scott is a Chicago-based media entrepreneur, investor, and the CEO of Technori. As CEO of Technori, Scott has played a role in shaping Chicago into one of the largest and most inclusive tech ecosystems in the world. Technori disrupts how startups are launched and funded by combining the power of equity crowdfunding with that of a passionate network of entrepreneurs, connected via highly curated events, podcasts, blogs, and the Technori pitch. The company has helped hundreds of founders raise more than $1 billion in venture funding, with more than 25 successful exits and over $20 billion in collective annual recurring revenue. As an operator, Scott has successfully built and sold 2 media companies. He's created the first ever radio show, enabling startups to fundraise directly from a live audience, resulting in more than $50 million invested via equity crowdfunding. Most recently, when most people are worried about, holding on to what they've got, Scott has become the CEO of a Chicago-based music media company by the name of Songfinch. Songfinch is a marketplace for music fans to buy songs written and performed by their favorite artists. Welcome to the show, Scott. It's great to have you on here.
Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. I apologize for the long intro. I think I got to work on that. I can get that down in like 2 sentences.
Yeah, you really got to stop doing things.
You're too successful.
That's right.
No,
we like to have people on here that actually have accomplished things. It's an odd thing we do with this podcast.
Well, I had a show recently with a guy who literally was like one of the most accomplished people of all time. And he had like a 1-sentence bio. And he was like, I just write the stuff that I screwed up. He's a failure bio. Like, I'm going to talk about failure. So I might as well just tell you the stuff I screwed up. Let's get over with it. I was like, I like this. I like this guy.
It's a good idea.
And I think that's actually, it's a great point about innovation, right? Where it's like, nobody bats 1,000 on innovation, right?
But they love to talk about failure. But when you look at their bios, all they talk about is their successes. And I think it tells you a lot about like where they actually view it. It's like, it's fun to talk about. It's like a humble brag. Like, I screwed this up, but don't worry, I made $1 million. Like, what a great screw up.
Yeah. Well, a good friend of mine who's done 7 or 8 startups, and he's like, people ask, how did I have 2 successful exits? And he's like, I started 7 companies.
Yeah.
Right.
You got to keep doing it until something happens. You get lucky at some point.
Yeah.
Luck.
Yeah.
It's a critical component.
Oh, for sure.
And Scott, if you don't mind, can you share with our listeners a little bit more about what Technori is and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the short pitch for anyone listening, Technori's been around for almost a decade now, which is hard to believe. It was originally launched as a local meetup. It was founders from companies like Spot Hero and Grubhub, Matt Maloney, Mark Lawrence, and in Chicago, started by Seth Kravitz, who was an entrepreneur who had just moved here from Cincinnati. And he was like, there's no place to meet investors or fellow geeks to like start companies together. And there just wasn't. There was no 1871 or anything like that at the time. So he starts Technori as a meetup. The meetup turns into a kind of self-help blog, which then he gets kind of a little bit of an idea to like chase after TechCrunch, and then that kind of fizzles. It ends up as in a monthly event at Chase Auditorium with 500 plus people in attendance, mostly VCs and other wannabe entrepreneurs, whatever you want to call it. At the time, that wasn't the thing, but they didn't use the word entrepreneurs, just like startup or starters, I think is what they called them. And anyway, over the next 3 or 4 years, going from like 2014 to 17, it was the preeminent pitch place in Chicago. I mean, it was companies coming from all over the country to spend 5 minutes on stage in front of investors and fellow entrepreneurs and tell them who they are and try to raise some early capital. We had a lot of success. I think during that period of time, there was about $300 or so million invested in those companies. Now it's well past $1 billion. We've had multiple instances. Ballot Ready is one that comes to mind. Female founders from Chicago who are vastly needed during this crazy political season, who literally someone in the audience came up and invested $1 million. So I'm like, these are real numbers, real things. It wasn't, $10,000 pitch competition or whatever. Over time, I brought that to WGN as an opportunity to create a live show where instead of catering to only 500 people on a random Tuesday, should you have time to make it, we could air it on Saturdays live on the radio. You could tune in and you could invest directly in companies. And we started making all the companies who came on stage or on the show at that time, they all had to be equity crowdfunding. And we had partnered with Republic, which I'm an investor in from the 2016 early days of crowdfunding. We still are partners with Republic. Over the years, we've sort of evolved it into a media company. We got away from the events, very fortunate given the COVID circumstances. That in 2018 we kind of closed the door on the large public event, and after that we started honing in on the podcast, and the podcast became kind of a national hit. We've got 12 million plus plays on the show over its history, and we now have something I'm really excited about, which is call it Technori Pitch 2.0. It's on Instagram. All these companies that are crowdfunding via Republic and other platforms too, but predominantly Republic, they send me their 1-minute pitch, and I do a follow-up 10-minute Q&A with them on YouTube. You can follow it on Technori YouTube, and then on the Technori and my personal Instagram, I will post a pitch review, which if you're familiar with Dave Portnoy and Barstool's pizza review, it's basically the same thing. I drop F-bombs all the time, so I apologize if that's a thing for you. But
how do you do the what is it, one bite, one pizza?
One bite, everybody knows the rule.
Everybody knows the rules.
So it's one question, everybody knows the rules. So in all the companies I've invested in via equity crowdfunding predominantly, I've made a bunch of investments for little money, but about 8 that were in the thousands, and I've had 5 of them already exit. So I've gotten knack for what I'm looking for. And so it comes down to can I summarize this in 7 words? Is the idea simple enough that I can explain it in a rational way? Is there a market that's actually real? It could be a lot of people, or it could be a lot of money against a little amount of people, but it's got to be real. Do I think the founder is legit? If I were to imagine somebody doing this, would it be you? And last and most importantly, will I get my money back? Because most of these companies may or may not be able to make it, but they may not be investable, period. And I think that's a huge thing that we'll probably talk about later in this episode is what is actually investable and what should you be leaving your cushy job to pursue. And then the end of it, just like my good friend, I wish, Dave Portnoy, I rate it. I'll be like Dante 32, who's on the podcast. I got to rate this. I don't know. I'm going to go 8.4. Boom. And then we throw it out there. And it's not tied to the pitch quality. It's do I think that it's basically those 4 things I listed. Where does it fall? And for anyone who hears this that's been on the show, no one gets a 10. No one even gets a 9. You'd have to be Uber to get a 9. So it's fun. It's meant to be fun, but it's been really successful. We've had what are we on? Episode 11. And we've had multiple couple $100,000 rounds filled up on it. We've had a couple hit $1 million on equity crowdfunding, which is the max. So
wow,
it's been a lot of fun. And I think Technori lives on in a digital world. And it's a gigantic network nationwide where founders and investors can just clip in and listen to somebody talk about their company before they invest in them.
It's pretty amazing. It's amazing, where it started and how it got to where you took it to. I think you could get Dave Portnoy I think Chicago's a market that they want. So there might be some synergy.
I would love to get him on. He would just beat me up, and then we'd get into a fight about stocks, and he'd be like, the stocks only go up. And I'd be like, you're out of your mind and you're ruining this economy. But that's a whole nother shit.
Well, what I really love is when he goes up against hockey players and he talks trash against these guys in the NHL, and he's playing golie on,
my God.
For hockey.
He is the internet's best troll. And I love him for it. I love him for it. He's a $100 million man, thanks to Penn.
So, you bring up a lot of great points about the investment in the dollars and things like that. What's the biggest trend you're seeing right now as we're going through this? And you mentioned from the scoring standpoint, I guess another concept that I'd like to talk about is, you mentioned nobody gets a 10, nobody even gets a 9. From your experience, when you've seen these things kind of move forward and from the investment dollars and moving forward, and would Uber have gotten a 9 when they were at that stage, right?
Yeah,
or does it take some kind of evolution and some real cash?
That's a good question. I'll use Uber as an example. It's a really good question. Sort of like Tesla too. That's so crazy. Would you actually rate them? So it goes back to, and Uber's a little unique in the sense that Travis Kalanick comes into Uber successful as a college kid. He was an entrepreneur and that kind of thing, but he's not Elon Musk, who's a co-founder of PayPal. So Elon comes into Tesla already doing something that the world said, no way, I'm never going to spend money online, just digitally. So he was a part of something that was transformational. On Travis' part, it's very similar to Evan Spiegel from Snapchat. I don't know your leadership qualities and skills and ability to scale. What I would have said about Uber, and this is a good point when you bring in Lyft into the mix, there's a million different people who try to disrupt the taxi cab industry. And basically, I had the founder of Curb, which is the same version as Uber, but for taxis, on the show. And he said it never dawned on us to chase after and go after the medallion. He never thought of that as a realistic option. Like he would get crushed in the government by trying to lobby against taking the medallion and competing with it. So he never even looked at it. And then Travis is like, no, I'm putting all my money and time into legislation and lobbying to chase after the medallion, which is what, essentially I keep saying that it's the paperwork essentially that taxi drivers have to have in order for them to be protected and ride taxi and do what they do. And so when he went after that, it was like, oh my God, you're thinking of this on a different level. And I think anyone could have come up with a brand and figured out how to do it, but no one would have been able to break the medallion the way he did. And that opens a door for Logan, the CEO at the time, founder of Lyft, to jump in. So if I hear these two pitches, and I actually heard Logan pitch on a Bloomberg show right about when Lyft had pitched, and I messaged him on Twitter, and he responded back because he wasn't a big deal then. And he kind of like told me that the 10-cent version of it. And to this day, he's on point with it, as is Travis is now gone, but Uber's on point with theirs, which was, we want to facilitate an army of people who can do random things. And once we have this flywheel, we can drop new things in it. So you see Uber Logistics, or Uber Freight, they call it, Uber Works, Uber Eats. Like all these things are built on this supply chain and logistics pattern that they built, that eventually they will no longer hire people to drive. It'll be all automated and they'll do it in segments. Whereas Lyft, when he pitched, it was Lyft Media, and he's now bringing that to fruition. They've got many, many, many millions of dollars coming in the form of advertising on the Lyft drivers and inside of car and on side of car and all this other stuff. Took two totally different approaches. And I think both of them are super unique. And I would have given them high grades because of the sophistication and the vision behind it. And in the cases of Travis and Logan, maybe less on the founder than say Tesla, which is Elon Musk, another company that, while completely different from the other two, is the same business. It's a logistics and supply chain of electric charging. They built a charging network and ultimately autonomous vehicles. So you can see that they'll launch it. I would envision a world where Travis is gone, where Uber and Lyft and those are actually partnering with Tesla to provide the automated driving plus the electric network and all this other stuff. So that's the kind of stuff where you get in a conversation with somebody and they're 20 years old, or 28, they're 32, and they can go all day long into the weeds. And you just know that if there was anyone, like, this person is indignant about explaining themselves. So you just know that they're going to be able to push things. They're going to have a force behind them that you just can't even. And then it comes down to, can they raise capital? So if somebody starts pitching me and the idea is gigantic but like, think of how complicated all the things I just explained were. They're super simple. At the end of the day, you're just taking a guy or girl from point A to point B and figuring out how to do it more efficiently. And if you can bring all this craziness into one sentence, and then I can tell that you're a nut, it looks good for you. So I don't know if I would have given 9s or 10s. Tesla, I would have given that 9+ just because you've got a guy who's already done it at a ridiculously high level. So he's got the money and all that jazz.
Have you changed the way you've evaluated these companies?
Yeah, I mean, hindsight, right? So you learn what you hear that doesn't work, and there's sort of things that I caught that I was like, that's a line I hear a lot, and I'm not really loving it. So maybe I just catch more of like the trip ups, like the little signs that tell you this person's full of shit, like that. I catch it, but I think in the end, and I did this interview with Vic Pascucci when he was at Lightbank, and he said it originally, and I'm sure other people have said it, but it's like, it's people. And the human being that you're investing in has to have identified, or human beings have to have identified an unfair advantage that they know how to build a business around that nobody else knows the next steps to. And then after that, it's integrity and work ethic and believability. And if they can sell it, then there's like just no reason to like, really, there's just no reason to doubt them, other than the obvious.
So there's a slate of shows that came out on Netflix last year that I kind of see as the quintessential dark side of some of this founder mentality, like the Theranos story.
Monolithic culture.
Well, and like Theranos and then Fire Island, right? Like where the guy in Fire Island was just absolutely deluded himself, right? Like you could see
that
it
was
as
a straight scam.
Right. And see, and that's where I don't know, this is where I wonder on the magnitude scale of like, a lot of founders, are they straight up scammers? Are they deluding themselves? Can they really pull it off? I think there's a magnitude there of like, yeah, you're ambitious and hopeful, but you're not completely
Lucid.
out of your mind. Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where it's like, I don't know, the whole Theranos thing where it's like, she gets labeled as a fraud, right?
Yep.
Where is it what she did really that different other than she missed the mark?
Yeah. So I've talked about this a bunch of times. The carpetbagger crazy thing, it's up to you if you smell it. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, some of these people are full of shit from the get-go, and there's just you got to know it or you don't know it. And the more momentum they get and the more funding they get, the more legit they look. And so if the first couple of investors bite on a fraud, everybody else is in trouble because the shark just made its way into the pond. And now you've got trouble. And that it's just like, there's not a lot you can do other than just be like, I personally don't dig this. I think your point that the Theranos story is a story of a person who had a gigantic dream, who believed that she could do it. And that if there was enough time and enough money, she'd do it. And at certain points, the fake it till you make it. We've talked about this a number of times with Outcome Health here in Chicago. Like had he, had Rishi and the team been able to make that work the way they were before everything went bad, we're probably not talking about it this way. We're not feeling a little bit weird in our stomach as I say this right now, which I am. I don't think most of them are bad or ill-willed. In fact, I would actually argue that most of them are trying to do something crazy and unbelievable, and that takes a crazy amount of belief in something. And what I've also have noticed is, and this is something that I try to tell other people, especially angel investors, retail investors on equity crowdfunding platforms, is usually the scammy ones are the small ones that no one will notice. They're not trying to make some $1 billion empire because they know that they'll get caught at some point, it will fall. They're trying to get you on like $10, $100, $1,000, $5,000, some old lady on, quick repair, whatever, steal your data, sell it. The sliminess is obvious. And you can just tell like the amount of effort that they put into something that has such a low ceiling. You just know that there's a hook. Like, where's the rub? You know what I mean? It's like a circus person, carny, trying to sell you something. So I actually look for the big idea ones. It's sort of like, it's a crazy idea. So you have to be a little bit on the hook yourself as the investor if you buy it. I mean, you want to believe it, but
Yeah, I wrestle with this myself. I've thought about it. Like I think about great leaders. I think about, you think about from good to great, right? That humble leader who doesn't make a big show of himself, and they created, and I know that historically speaking, the built to last, some of those have not lasted, right? I've always thought that for somebody to be a great leader, you had to have some self-doubt, right? There's a lot of it, I hope. I would hope too, right? Not enough that it's crippling when things go wrong. Obviously, you got to pick up your feet and keep moving. But I do think like people who have that ambition of like to grow $1 billion business, their confidence level has to be just off the charts, of like almost to the point of narcissistic, right? Because everybody's going to tell you you're an idiot, and like you're lining yourself up to be, even if you did think you had a good plan and you were executing on it, you could still end up in the fraud column.
Oh, 100%. And I like to go towards athletes in this just because I think it's an obvious, you can actually, unlike businesses, you can't get in the boardroom. Here you can like literally see them on the court or whatever. And the Kobe and the Michael Jordan from The Last Dance, I think, stand out to me. And there's others that look like Ray Allen, Reggie Miller, and Steph Curry in the 3-point shooting, and Larry Bird to that effect.
when he didn't even take off his warm-up suit?
Yeah, he said he was taking second place tonight, and then he crushed it when exactly. Didn't miss a shot. These are guys who have no conscience. They believe that they have put in the countless hours required to master their craft, and they will put that craft up against your craft every single day of the week and twice on Sunday because they know they put the time in, so they do it. And then afterward, they analyze the shit out of it, and they're like, oh my God, like I missed this, I stepped wrong here, the timing was wrong. Like they're so obsessive about their mistakes, but it doesn't impact their confidence. They just take it as like, these are all the flaws I have. I've got to work on it. And You look at like Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan. I mean, people look at Kobe a little differently now after his unfortunate death. But at the time, people didn't think he was a good leader. And Michael Jordan's the epitome of leader. And if you listen to anything you saw on Kobe and you listen to Last Dance, they're the same person. You've got a person who literally is going 100% all the time and says, I did it, so you can do it. And if you don't want to do it, then get out of the room. And their full transparency and their screw ups are the first ones to admit all the games that they've screwed up and where they worked on it. And they just say the same thing to you. And if you don't like it, then get out of the room. And I think the startup world is an interesting correlation because, and obviously all business, but startups in particular, because there's a nakedness to the founders. They're kind of a charlatan until they're not. And I think that if you put in all the time and you're humble about who you are and you realize that you're never going to achieve whatever crazy dream you have in your head, like you'll always come up short, and you're incredibly self-reflective, and you know how to take the time to listen to your team and try not to be a jerk unless it is the last recourse, and explain to people that, like, I work all day long on this. And this is, I'll give you this little aside here. This is a good example. Working with several startup companies myself, and had team members who I've routinely said to them, like, we're not in a position for me to give you equity right now because it's worth nothing. The only thing it's worth right now is crippling me to negotiate terms later because I got to figure out how to get rid of this person. Right. So I promise you I'll take care of you. But when you ask me, do we get 5% or whatever, I ask you, are you going to be doing this 24/7 like I am? I don't have friends and hobbies. I'm on my phone doing this all day and all night. I'm out for 4th of July with my wife and her friends. Like, what the hell's wrong with you? We're watching a concert in a yard, and all social distancing, I might add. We're all social
Very nice.
distancing.
Well played.
Played. Mask and all, which is actually true. But I was just like looking over notes and things on my phone and slacking a couple of things back and forth to myself because that's just what was going on in my head. I was watching, like, it never leaves. And so before you take equity from somebody when they're at this stage, you have to be committed like that. That's crazy committed. Like, your friend is the business. Like, that's what it is. And, I think you got to take care of your team though. So, like, is the equity at this stage more important and more valuable in my pocket or in your pocket? It's in my pocket because it's not cash. It's leverage. And I think if you tell your team from the get-go, if you stick with me and you do the best you possibly can, and you're the right fit for this, I will make sure before I die, I will make sure that you're compensated well for it. But, understand that the difference between an employee and a person who's literally their whole essence is in this company is that they ride or die. And I take the responsibility of paying my team back one way or another very seriously. So they get paid before I get paid. That's another, part of the equation. So I think leadership it's not about talking. It's about just doing what you're supposed to do and being humble about it. And, it's sort of, I think of a lot of like military, analogies as well. Like, before they go down range, is everybody good? Like, if everything's good at home, then we can all go do this. But if one person's out of whack, we got to pool together to get that person out of whack, and then we go back to business. And that's how you do it.
Well, and I think you touched on a great point. A mistake I've seen in my limited, nowhere near your level of experience, but my limited experience with founders and those situations where you're still, I give you equity, you actually owe me money.
Yeah.
If I gave you equity, right?
Yep.
You owe me 20 grand because we're in the hole bad.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
I think the biggest mistake I see founders make with that is they offer equity to people that, one, don't know what it means.
Yep.
It doesn't actually, they don't value it, and it's not going to motivate the behavior. That is that assumption, like you mentioned, that ride or die of like, if I'm giving you equity, right, I expect your commitment to match mine. And I think that's the biggest mistake I've seen with founders is they don't communicate that before they give them equity, and they will give equity. And then all of a sudden they're like, yo, this person's not showing up on Saturday. And it's like, did you talk about that beforehand? Because they might have said, no, thanks.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, hey, that's team building. I would say how the founder, and I've made these mistakes, by the way. This isn't my just like saying it like I knew it. I went through this myself. So I know for a fact that I didn't do the right things. I made expectations. I didn't communicate well. I didn't even think of it well. And the first company was a disaster. I hired all of my favorite people and I fired all of my favorite people. And we're not talking anymore. Most of us aren't even friends anymore. I had to fire a guy and kick him out of my house the same day. It wasn't a great day. And
for him or you.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. Well, it was a pretty good day for me afterward, but I needed the break. But the reality was, like, it was my fault. Like he was lazy, but it was my fault. And so what I would say, and this goes back to the original stuff about picking a founder or picking a startup, picking your initial team and giving out equity is essentially your very first exercise in hiring. And if you're going to build a team to accomplish something that no one's done before, you better be sure of the team. And if you're not asking them, like, here's what I need, what are your skill sets and how does it deliver? And then here's the kind of pace that I'm going to work at. Because I know that if, like I talked to a guy about the new company I'm working on, we're raising a Series A right now. And, more than $1 million of it's going to tech. And he's like, the guy I talked to on the tech side, it's like, it would be about a 12-month project. And I was like, nah, it's going to be like a 6-month project. And he was like, that's twice as much. And I was like, well, then we got to raise more, I guess. Because if we don't get it done in that amount of time, we might as well not even do it, because somebody else will be out by then and it's done. And so if people on your team don't view that kind of urgency and don't realize, like, literally, I view this as if we don't do this right now, we might as well just go find another thing. Then you got the wrong people, and that's on you. That's not on them.
Well, I do think, that critical team, right? Hiring your friends. I always go back to the, when you go off to college and everybody's like, oh, don't be a roommate with your friend from high school because you'll never, that held true.
Yep.
And then the hiring your friends just means you're going to fire your friends.
Yeah,
right.
It's terrible. Unless you don't like them, in which case then it's a great way to get out of it.
It's a good song. Yeah.
It's a good way to get out of a friendship. That's like a Larry David move. I hired him so I could fire him.
You might want to hire your in-laws then.
Oh, you hire all your in-laws, and then you fire all of them.
You never have to talk to them again. You're never invited over again.
That's a Scott move.
2 birds, 1 stone.
Oh my God. So true.
So one of the things I see, and that's great. I really think that critical element of leadership and, like, who is the leader? Do they understand the role? You talked about Elon Musk and, like, that whole, the mafia that he came from. Yep. Right. And, like, that gives such credibility to, he's at least made some mistakes before. He knows how to do investment. He understands the tempo. And so when you see people who are moving into that, right? So somebody who's maybe never done that before, from your experience, what is it somebody, one of our listeners that may be sitting there with a good idea and thinking, I'd like to take a shot at this. Everybody knows downturns are a great time to start new businesses, right? And especially now there's still so much cash in the marketplace.
I'm in hog heaven, right? I feel terrible for the people who are impacted health-wise, and I'm worried about my own parents and all that. But from a business-only operator perspective, this is hog heaven. I'm an introvert, other than on my show. In real life, I like hang out in my little room. I don't do anything but work. This has just been like a free pass to get 3 hours of my day from commuting back and look at deals and get them on the cheap. Like, it's just great.
So what are some of the things you think people could do to get more involved? What's that first step?
Yeah, I mean, so true, and this sounds hokey, but the first step is in your own head. If you're a person, so step back. If you're a single person, then go for it. Who gives a shit? You'll learn. Like, you'll figure it out. You'll go broke. You won't go broke. You'll be successful. It won't work. You'll hate it. You'll take a job again. Whatever. Go out and try it. You can't lose. The colleges are taking $1 gazillion away from you anyway, so you might as well just do it. If you have a family, you've got to get your family right. I have way too many friends right now who are trying to take this leap, and their spouses are like, "What? We have a house, we have kids, and they're like, oh, it'll be like a year or two of like tight, and I'm like, no, it'll be 8, 5, yeah. I mean, it's like, and that was one of the things I didn't listen to. I was 2 years into this, a year and a half into this. And a guy from Northwestern, I went to grad school there, and he called me and was like, oh, like 6 or 7 more years, you'll have an idea of what you're doing. And by like 8 to 10 years, you're going to be running. And I was like, you got to be out of your mind, man. I'm a smart guy. I'll figure this out. I'm on year 8 right now. This is the first time since I started this that I actually know how to make money. Like, the first time I actually understood the mechanism of what I do and how I manipulate my system to work. Everything else I thought I knew, I was wrong. It was all just smoke and mirrors. And I got lucky because I could sell occasionally like that. Though none of those things were scalable. If I would have stayed with them, I would have screwed them up. So that understanding of, like, do I have a family that's going to support this? And they understand that this is like, I want it that bad. Like, I'm willing to risk everything to the point where I want it that bad. If you don't have that burn, don't do it. Also, if risk is a thing that you don't like, literally don't flinch. And I'm not like a fighter guy, so I'm not trying to suggest like be a tough guy and girls are the same thing. If you're the kind of person where like aggression comes at you and you like are anti-aggression or anti-conflict, this isn't for you. Like I can just save it for you because it's a battle and everyone is trying, like the minute you go live, everyone's trying to eat your lunch.
Right. Well, and I think you brought up Kobe and it's great metaphors because it's about compete.
Oh yeah.
Right?
This is a game. If you,
right.
I'm glad you said it. This is the best way to sum this up. To me, and my wife says this to me all the time, she thinks I'm nuts. All of these deals that I'm working on right now, it's just a game. To me, I don't care about the money, the units, it's extra zeros or not zero. I don't even care. I don't even spend it. I give it all to her anyway. I don't, whatever, go buy whatever you want to do. And she works really hard as a teacher. So it's not like it's that kind of thing. The money is insignificant. It's about the game. And if this is anything more than that to you, if it's emotional or it's like about the dollars, you won't be able to do it because you can't stay obsessed with that long enough.
Well, and you brought up a great point with Jordan and like the compete, the dollars, right? It's not about the dollars. It's about the winning, right? And like the famous story of most people in Chicago know the famous story that while Jordan was golfing one time, it started raining. So he went into the caddy shack. I have sons that are caddies now. So I know how bizarre it would be to have Michael Jordan in a caddy shack at one of these golf courses, but he's playing these kids for playing pool against them for money.
Yeah.
Right. And so when he won, he took their money.
Yeah.
Right. And like people are like, oh, what a cheapskate. It's like, no, you're missing the point. The money was points. Right. Yeah. That was just it. He doesn't do anything unless he can compete.
Know he won. That's how you.
That's right.
It's how you feel it.
He's competing. He competes at everything. I guarantee you, he's timing himself on his way home every day, looking at his clock. Like I bet I can cut 30 seconds off of this.
Yeah,
and Michael, if you're listening, give me a call. We can hang
have
out.
You on the show.
It'd be pretty cool.
Get you on the show.
You know,
Flight
seems pretty relevant to America.
Yeah, right now it couldn't be more relevant.
So,
sorry, Shelly.
No, I was just curious, Scott. What are some of the really hot startups in Chicago right now?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the size we're talking startup. I mean, if you're looking at companies that I think are in the more well-funded area, obviously Cameo is just crushing it.
Yeah.
And Steven, I have said this numerous times, so I'll say it again. He's an absolute genius. He launched, ironically, on stage at Technori in January 2017 with Songfinch, the company that I acquired a share of and now I'm CEO of. And I told him then he's a genius. And at the time, he was passing his deck around, raising some money. And I knew he was going to be successful. I think he did too. You can just tell with certain people. But he was selling as an autograph, modern day autograph. And I know that he said that because he was trying to relate to people, but he knew it was a bigger thing. And he has driven a Mack truck through a gift industry that will change the world forever, the way we expect to communicate with celebrities and the way that we just enjoy each other as like entertainment and gifts and whatever. He has created a new industry. And not just created it, he's like $1 billion company soon to be. And that's no joke. And then he's done it from Chicago, which is crazy. Yeah. So that one is no doubt a huge deal in the Chicagoland. I like to hope that our company, Songfinches, we're just getting rolling, which is the same age, but a little behind the curve of theirs, has the potential to be something really interesting in the space. I also know that, Clearcover, Kyle Nakasugi, is an insurance tech company here in Chicago, and Kyle's a genius and has done all the right things. And I can't wait to see what they build. It's just, he's an incredible founder. I talk about him a lot. Tavala in the food space. David Raby is created. I use it I'm a customer of it for home and away. I love the way that he's taken to the company, and they're blowing up. Obviously with COVID, it's helping their business, but just a real smart guy and smart company. Farmer's Fridge is similar. They're struggling a little bit right now because of no one's in the workplace, but I think at some point, he'll be back on track with that. And then there's companies like Reaply, which I look at these companies who have identified kind of the future of work, future of living. And there's something called the circle cycle. And essentially, it's basically, this understanding that we reuse everything. We're going to have to, because everyone can't have a cell phone and throw it in the dumpster and then have a new one in 5 minutes. And so in order to be sustainable and more economical, we're already using this circle industry or economy for employees. We have freelancers and gig employees. They work for you. They work for somebody else. They do the same thing for 5 people. we're essentially circulating the skill set. And the same thing can be said with technology. You all have, this computer, this, whatever, this whole setup we're recording on. And once you're done or you move on to something more sophisticated, there's somebody who's underneath you that could probably benefit from having it and that can be reused instead of thrown in the garbage. And Reaply is doing that. I just did a podcast with Gary Cooper, who's the CEO. Super smart guy. He's been on TV a lot lately with the mayor, not just because he's a Black founder, but he's also, doing a lot of stuff for PPE and has sort of helped hospitals reuse and resurface ventilators and things. So that one I have an eye on as a huge growth opportunity. And then there's a bunch of other companies that have been good. I mean, Snapsheet and others are down right now because of the lack of people driving around. But, we've got a lot of really interesting companies here right now, for sure.
That's interesting. We've had quite a few founders, CEOs from like Y-Charts.
Yeah, Sean Brown.
Yeah, great guy.
We're
blessed. He's got an extensive vocabulary, and he really was very impressed with my extensive vocabulary. That was like, I'd say about 15% of our whole conversation was trying to one up each other on polysyllabic words, which was a lot of fun for us.
I'm very limited there.
It really wasn't that interesting, but it was a great conversation. But that's really cool stuff. The cameo thing kills me. Right, I did not see that coming.
A lot of people didn't. They thought it was a gimmick, and I remember saying, Steven said this once on a panel I was on with him, where he was like, let's say we're only successful to the point where people only try us once, but there's 1 billion people who try us, so that's $100 billion. A lot of money.
I do fall in that category. I did one with, I got one for my wife for her anniversary. I forget the actor's name, but it's from Beautiful Girls from the 80s. And, there's a scene that she loves. So I had him kind of do it and do happy birthday or whatever. But, just even you bringing it up again, I know I have an employee who has an anniversary coming up. And I'm like,
it's such a easy, and like, it's even more than that, because for like maybe it's a gift, but for that person, it might be an entrance into continuing to do these funny things with their friends where they engage with celebrities. Yeah. And, Steven makes the vast majority of his money on the sort of, call it, D-list influencers who are just known commodities to those who are on Instagram and TikTok. And to you and I, maybe they're nobodies. But it's changing the way. I mean, to me, the future of social media really is that. It's not sitting here posting garbage about politics. It's like playing with our favorite people. Yeah, please. Yeah. Right.
I could use a little less politics.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're kind of running out of time, but man, I think we could keep this going for at least 4 or 5 more days. And Scott, really, what a pleasure to have you on. You got such a great perspective, great attitude, a lot of experience. I'd love to have you on again, maybe anytime. Later this year.
Anytime.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
And we also wanted to thank you, our listeners. We really appreciate everybody taking the time to join us and listen to Scott's stories and really get a better understanding of where Chicago's at from an investment standpoint.
And if you'd like to receive new episodes as they're published, you can subscribe by visiting our website at dragonspears.com/podcast, or find us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode was sponsored by Dragon Spears and produced by Dante32.